Welcome to Trifecta Collective, Finding the Root with Megan and Shannon, the podcast, where we dive deep into all things health and wellness to help you find health and healing inside and out for now and forever. Hello, and welcome to Trifecta Collective, Finding the Root with Megan and Shannon, the podcast. Today is going to be a little bit of a different episode here. Instead of kind of diving deep into a more specific health topic, we're going to talk about plant medicine. We're going to talk about psychedelics. We're going to talk from our standpoint, and I also have formal education in this. So I will certainly touch on that as we go in sharing a lot of, I won't say a lot of, but definitely some of the science behind a lot of this. We're going to talk about our personal stories, definitely a whole lot today. And I'm going to guess we will probably do a second episode where we chat more about this. And maybe we're going to start with some microdosing and our own personal stories. And then if we have time, we'll get into particularly my larger journey work as a participant and as a facilitator, what that looks like, how does that kind of work, suggestions if you're interested in participating more in this, and we'll probably talk about, we're going to start with some particular plants today, and I do have experience in other ones that I will certainly share, but we probably won't get too deep into them on this episode. So before we dive in, we will be talking a lot about trauma healing, anxiety, depression. I'm sure eating disorders will come up. I'm sure a variety of abuse will come up. So just a real blanket trigger warning here. Once again, we are talking about psychedelics, plant medicine, psychedelic assisted therapy in that world. So just come in with the understanding of that here. So let's start. I'll first start. I don't even know where to start. So I'll first start by sharing, I guess. So we're going to start too many things at once. So we're going to start with, I'm going to share what I have done, plant medicines I have done, and then we'll get into a little bit more specifically about how we got into these. So I'm going to say plant medicines and psychedelics because not all of these are plant medicines. So I started with ketamine assisted therapy. I've done microdosing with ketamine, psilocybin, which is magic mushrooms, and LSD. And then I've also done larger journeys with MDMA, psilocybin, ayahuasca, and wachuma, which is a cactus, San Pedro.
You've got the list
I
compared
do.
to me.
I've done a few. I've been in the space a little bit longer than Shannon, for sure.
Yeah. So, for me, just psilocybin, really. That's, and we'll dive into that in a second here, like how we got into it. But yeah, that's the only one on my list right now.
Yeah, just right now.
Yeah.
There's lots of room to explore if the desire and the call is there.
Yes.
So do you want to start with how you got into psychedelics, how you got into plant medicine and your interest kind of in it?
Yeah. So little backstory. When I was 13 years old is when I really got into alcohol abuse, and I used like marijuana. I was using them as coping mechanisms essentially, and to try and be comfortable with myself, try to manage my emotions, all the things. So I started at like a pretty early age, but those were the only two things that I experimented with throughout the time frame of, so like 12 or 13 years old, I would say into maybe like 12th grade, so 18 years old, there was a lot of people around me experimenting with other things. Ketamine, ecstasy, DMT, psilocybin, tons of things. And I never felt called to do like any of that stuff. And granted, in that situation, it was not being used in any spiritual healing sense. It was purely, no one knew what they were doing, and everyone was, it wasn't like what this is at all. But I was never like interested in doing any of that because I was already so depressed and had so much anxiety. I had already had a suicide attempt that I was afraid of the what's the right word for this? Like dopamine spike and drop. So I was just like so fearful that if I participated in any of this other stuff, that my body essentially just wouldn't be able to handle it. And I would feel so much worse than I was already feeling, which I could barely handle as it was at that time. So didn't want to do it. Fast forward into like mid 20s. I had gone to talk therapy that entire time, pretty much. So, like 13 to 25 years old, give or take, a couple periods of time where I wasn't in therapy, but majority of that time was spent in talk therapy. And I just kind of got to a point where it's like I kind of felt like I was banging my head against a wall. Like, yes, I learned a lot of tools, I worked through different things, but nothing felt truly better. Like I didn't feel like I was coming out of anything or like fully healing anything. Um, yeah, and then I started to get into and some of the energy work stuff, but really probably 2021. I think it was 2021. I joined it was called a manifestation program, essentially, which turned out to be, this is really cool. This is a huge part of my journey, which turned out to be shadow work, inner child work, healing trauma. And they also talked about psilocybin and mushrooms and how it can help you do this. But at that point, like I was really just diving into that stuff and it still felt like kind of scary to me. And I had also, in 2022, I moved to a new state and I didn't know anyone, didn't have any family, friends there. So it's not like, it wasn't an easy thing to get into. It wasn't like being dropped in my lap at that time. And then 2023, you and I started working together and pretty much so I had been thinking about it for like roughly 2 years at that point, but just didn't really know how to start or how to access it or what to do with it. So we started working together. You were already into it. I think you had just created, or maybe that was after, created your program at the time. But yeah, it pretty much fell in my lap and it was like, all right, now's the time. Like you need to use this tool. So that's really how I got into it. And one thing I will add is I had the mushrooms for a month. I had them with me. There was a lot of fear around it still. Kind of what I said. I was scared that I was going to like regress back into some like awful depression or something. It was very scary to me. So I had them for roughly a month. And in August of 2023, going to try not to cry here. I warned Megan that I was emotional before we even started this.
All emotions are always welcome here.
Yeah. My uncle, my godfather passed away very unexpectedly in August of 2023. At that point, it was just like you need to do this. There's no question about it. You need to learn a new tool to help you process what's about to come up and happen for you. And that was really my go point.
Yeah, absolutely. So, similar stories. I was 13 when I started drinking. I also, if you haven't listened to any of our other episodes, I grew up with a single mom who was an alcoholic. That was her main coping mechanism. That is the main coping mechanism I learned.
Oh.
I also dealt with anxiety and depression really young. My first suicide attempt was at 11, and I just didn't know how to cope. I was also in talk therapy. Spent 10 years in talk therapy, anywhere between 1 to 3 times a week. I was on a variety of medications, which also you should not drink. But once again, that was mirrored to me. My mom had a lot of issues herself with anxiety and depression. She was on a lot of medications and also drinking very heavily. And so like that's what I saw. And so that's how I started to cope. Just before high school, getting into high school, mine lasted a little bit longer into college, into post-college, and it wasn't really until my mid-20s, and for reference, I'm 34 now, that I started having to make the switch because of health issues. And my first elimination diet, honestly, the thing that was the scariest to me was having to reduce and or cut out alcohol. That was how I dealt with life, with stressors. Once again, I was in therapy for 10 years and I was very high functioning all of the time. But that was my way to cope outside of medication for a while there. And I got off medication when I was about 25. And yeah, it was very, I wouldn't say I was an alcoholic, but it was definitely a problem. And I do drink now, but it's very, very rare. I had 5 total drinks last year for reference. And the biggest shift for me was getting into the plant medicine space. Right now it's the end of April. I have yet to have a drink this year. Have no real desire to. If the occasion arises, maybe, but that is, I've spent so much time now getting into my body that the thought of having a drink and being numb to my body, that's almost scarier to me than the opposite.
Mhm.
So yeah, a lot of anxiety, a lot of depression. Once I got off meds, I was still trying to figure out ways to navigate my mental health. It was not great. It was good enough to stay off of medication, but not great. Was never happy. I never felt like a sense of happiness. I didn't really know what that felt like. And when I started getting into a lot of my deeper trauma healing with trauma therapy and hypnotherapy and all the modalities that we've talked about in other episodes, it got to a point where I really felt stuck. And I had uncovered a lot. I had done a lot of inner work of all sorts. And I felt like I couldn't tap into anything deeper. I felt like I wasn't making any more progress with my health. And I knew I still had a lot of room and opportunity to grow. I knew I still had a lot of trauma to process. My mom died pretty suddenly in 2020, and that was big. And thank goodness I had already gone into not the psychedelic world, but the trauma healing world. And I got a call one day like, hey, you gotta come up and you got to pull the plug. And less than 2 years later, my uncle passed away suddenly as well. So and that's just after I had gotten when he passed, I had just gotten into the psychedelic world. And so yeah, it was a ride, and I was very fortunate that at the time when I was already interested in it, I had the opportunity. I was working with someone who was a friend, and she was getting education in the space, in the ketamine space, and then that expanded. And so she started being able to have connections and shared a lot of those connections with me. Like you, I was afraid. I was like terrified doing it growing up. The very few times where it was offered, I remember thinking like, when you do acid, when you do these psychedelics, you're going to have flashbacks for the rest of your life. And, all these like really scary big things. Even cannabis wasn't a big deal. I smoked a handful of times, high school and college. I did do some other things after college for another episode here. And yeah, there was still some fear, but I really knew at the time that this was my next step in healing. I also knew I knew nothing about it, and I knew that I needed to be very much supported in this process. So I started, I did ketamine assisted therapy first, and I did a full session. And the ketamine, I also want to clarify when I did a ketamine session, because this is pretty popular now, I did not go into an infusion clinic. I didn't go into a very clinical setting. I was working with someone who was clinically trained, but also it was a different environment. I like laid on a nice couch. I was by myself. She was with me the whole time. There was music playing, like very specific music playing that was meant to guide me in the process. I was really cozy. I had a journal with me. It was a dedicated like 3 hour session, just her and I, to be able to hold the space. I had time, like we did a lot of preparation, intention setting, clearing the space beforehand. We did some aromatherapy beforehand. It was a really warm and welcoming experience, and it was a very beautiful experience. It was very relaxing. It was a very interesting feeling for me, in I'd say at the height of the experience, at the height of the journey, of really not feeling my body and being able to feel really at peace, to explore some things in my mind. And yeah, I mean, it was really beautiful. And the days after were also very beautiful. And it really helped me start to understand how to feel and process emotions and be able to express those emotions more clearly than I ever had before. Ketamine is definitely not my thing, having done many other things at this point, but I will say it was a very beautiful experience. It was a beautiful start to my journey into this work, and I'm very grateful for that experience. Shortly after that, I got into microdosing with psilocybin. I was in a microdosing group. I've done, for reference now, 3 microdosing groups as a participant. And then I also have education around microdosing, how to support in microdosing protocols. I have a couple of books up there all about microdosing. So I think microdosing is amazing. I've been microdosing for the better part since I started. I do take breaks, but by and large, I'm microdosing more often than I'm not. And I'm a huge fan. It's been such a game changer for my mental and emotional health and being able to tap into process. When I first started microdosing, I didn't realize how much anxiety I was still dealing with. And yeah, I had no idea. And I thought I was doing great because it was leaps and bounds from where I came from. And then I started microdosing. I'm like, oh, this is what peace feels like. This is what being calm, this is what being centered, this is what that feels like. And I had never experienced that before.
Yeah. I can say the same exact thing. In fact, it's so crazy because I truly felt the same way for is all the work that I've done as far as I had come before starting psilocybin and then actually doing it for the first, I will say, for the first like week, 2 months, because I was also trying to process something that was really heavy and big at the same time. I was incredibly emotional, like crying a lot, just trying to process all these things and like the new emotions coming up with my uncle passing. So there was a lot that was going on in my body, but still the sense of peace and calm that I felt in interconnection with myself is something that I hadn't experienced before. And it was it's an incredible feeling. I almost don't know how to describe it until you just actually try it and feel it yourself. But that later in my journey, the I went through some things again, and we'll get into that deeper here, but some of that stuff actually came back up for me, and it was kind of like more of like a death rebirth thing. But yeah, just being able to see like, oh, this is what it feels like to be calm and regulated and not feel flustered all the time is a really big part of this work.
It really is. And for microdosing, so I've mostly microdosed with psilocybin. That is what I personally feel most connected with. Like I said, I've microdosed with other things. LSD is really common to microdose with. I know people who love it, who feel so connected to it. I personally was not. And for me, I think where I'm coming from with it is I really like plants. I really connect with different plants, and I do some work with tobacco now, and it's not necessarily smoking, it's other forms, ceremonial forms of tobacco, and it connects with me in a way nothing else has. And so for me, it really feels like there's something about the plants, and LSD is not a plant. And that I think is really powerful for me personally. Once again, I think it depends on the person, it depends on what you're dealing with. But I think it's also very powerful. Ketamine is also very powerful in microdosing as well. Once again, I've microdosed with that. And I know people who like seasonal affectiveness disorder. It is like a huge, huge support. And and it's legal. If you see a practitioner who prescribes it and can work with you with that, I mean, you can get it from a physician, and it's a really powerful tool. So, those are options, but I think by and large, we're going to talk about psilocybin here. Obviously, that's your experience. That's what I prefer to work with, and that's when I do microdosing support with other people. As a facilitator, I mainly use psilocybin. That is my preferred method.
Yeah, I also haven't felt, and it's still fairly new to me, but I haven't felt called to anything else. I'm a very nature, earth person. Plants really speak to me, so I'm sure that's why I have not yet felt called to do anything else besides that. So we'll see down the line. I'm still early in the game, but yeah.
Yeah. And so one of the reasons why microdosing is really powerful, and just for clarification with microdosing, so microdosing is you are taking a super tiny amount that you do not have and you should not have psychoactive effects. So usually in my protocols that I usually recommend as a starting point, and I have microdosed many other ways other than this, but this is how I usually recommend starting with it, is a 0.025 grams. So, I mean, it is the tiniest amount, and slowly working your way up to, I'd say most people land anywhere between 0.75, 1, 0.1, 0.125 grams. I certainly know people who microdose at 0.2 grams. It's aggressive for me to microdose at 0.2. 0.1 can, depending on where I am and what I'm working with, I mean, that can be aggressive for me. And so it's the tiniest, really tiniest amount. And for reference, most larger journeys are going to start anywhere between, it depends on who you are, who you talk to. I'd say 2.5 grams for reference is a starting point. It's a pretty low dose for a larger journey. I'd say most 2.5 to 3 grams, depending on the strain, depending on the person, what you're doing. Anywhere up to like 5 is pretty common. Yes, you can journey at higher than that. Once again, I know plenty of people who do. I've never journeyed at anything above 4.5 grams, just for reference. And I usually microdose around 0.75 to zero point 0.1 grams. So they say it's like 1/10-ish. I'd say it's even less than that for most people for the microdosing.
Yeah, I've been doing it since August, and there's only been a handful of times where I've gotten up to point 0.075 on the mini shift journeys that I've done, gone a little bit higher than that. But ideally, like I keep it pretty low. I also check in with myself every day though, and usually a number comes to me with, like you said, where you're at, what are you trying to work on, and I just go from there. But lately it has been pretty low. I'm talking like 0.022, pretty low. Because when I
Yeah.
start to go higher than that, sometimes it's just more to process. And if I'm not feeling it, or if I'm not in the right mindset, you just don't want to push it. You don't want to push yourself too far.
Exactly. And it also, for once again, like for clients that I support, I usually recommend starting with 3 days a week with a day in between and 2 days off in a row. So that would look like a Monday, Wednesday, Friday, Tuesday, Thursday, Saturday, something like that. And they're for the reason of it builds upon itself. So if you do 2 days in a row, it'll get you. If especially if you're new, like I can do 2 days in a row now. And once again, I very much check in with myself, but if I'm feeling called to do 2 days in a row, I'm very aware of the total dosage I've done and how my body responds. And also, what do I have going on that day? If
Yeah.
I have, I largely use microdosing as a tool for focus and creativity now. And so when I have an open space day and I'm doing a lot of creative work, maybe content creation, maybe working on a new project, yeah, I might do a 0.1. And even if I did it the day before, I know that I have that open space where if I feel called to go in, to meditate a little bit, to have some quiet space, to come in and then do some work and then pull back out, I have that freedom and flexibility It's also, I'm not surrounded by a bunch of people, and I'm not overstimulated, and it's really just me by myself. And that is largely not the case for most people in the world here. I know I am an exception. So I am also aware of that, which is once again, I don't recommend 2 days in a row as a starting point. As you get to learn yourself, there's so much freedom and flexibility. You can do intuitive, you can do 4 days on, 3 days off, 5 days on, 2 days off. Those are especially more common with like higher levels of depression, anxiety, chronic pain. If you have chronic pain, 5 days on, 2 days off is super, super common and really, really supportive. The 2 days off in a row is really important from a tolerance perspective. So psilocybin will stay in your body for a whole day. You need the 48 hours to really allow it to clear out of your system. And that inhibits just a tolerance build. And so that's the biggest reason why I typically recommend those 2 days off in a row. I also recommend 8 weeks on and then at least 2 to 4 weeks off. Once again, just for titration, give your body a break. A lot of people don't need to do this long term. A big reason to do this is changing how your brain thinks. These psychedelics increase neural pathways and neuroplasticity in general, meaning it helps you change how your brain thinks. And there are negatives to that. So I'll be very mindful of that. And so when I first started microdosing, a lot of the recommendations were around incorporating new habits that were supportive of self-love, self-care, mindfulness, that kind of thing. And microdosing is amazing as a way to support new habits. Now, you're not going to microdose and be like, all right, I'm ready to work out. I'm ready to meditate. I'm ready to do all the things. Like, that's not quite how it works. But you microdose and you start intentionally incorporating these things, and your brain picks up on it faster. Your brain starts to make the physical, mental, emotional connection of these habits and how you feel. And so it's easier. It's easier to start new habits. I'll tell you, after every large journey I've ever done, my morning routine changes up drastically every single time. And I ask myself what do I want this time? What am I looking for? And it's just an accident that new things pop up. Since I've been back from Colombia, I wake up, I meditate, which is very common for me. I usually do some energy work, especially around my sacral chakra, because I had a lot of sacral healing in that journey. I eat breakfast outside, which is new for me. And then I go do yoga or go to the gym right off the bat. Then I come home or get ready in some capacity, take my dog for a nice walk. So once again, I'm outside again. My lunches are outside as much as I can. Like there's a lot of outside. There's a lot of grounding time that is spent for me coming back from that particular journey. And that happened one other time. It wasn't as extensive of this, but all of these are new for me and I am feeling it. I love it. My body's feeling good. Mentally, emotionally, I'm feeling good with it. And it feels very supportive. And coming off of the journey, and then, I just started microdosing again. All of that's very supportive of these new habits, of the neuroplasticity. And then we get into, so that's one real benefit. The creativity and focus is another. Especially, I do like to pair the psilocybin with lion's mane, which is another mushroom. It's not a psychedelic. But it's really good for brain health. It's good for neuroplasticity. It's good for focus and cognition. So it really is an extra aid when it comes to the microdosing practice and support.
Yeah. And we recommend that a lot, even if you're just dealing with like brain fog or anything like that. Lion's mane can be super beneficial. It's funny, as you were talking about how your morning routine has changed, mine is like flipped to the opposite of what yours is now. So I used to get up in the morning, I would feel called to immediately journal, have breakfast, do some sort of short like yoga flow. Now I've been letting myself sleep in longer. I immediately go outside when I get up. I eat breakfast outside. It's just funny how, the shift can be so different for everyone. That being said, one of the things that I used microdosing to work on, or what has come up, I should say, is learning how to not be so structured in constantly feeling like I need to be doing and accomplishing all the time. So that was a really big thing for me that the psilocybin has helped me with. And it's still a struggle, but it's much better than it used to be for sure.
Yeah, that's amazing. And, it helps with awareness with some of the patterns that you are participating in and can help you become aware and then start to ask some questions. For me, the people pleasing being, and I'm not exaggerating here, terrified, utterly, physically, emotionally terrified of conflict. The thought of conflict, the possibility of conflict, even around people that were safe, it was so overwhelming. And this comes from growing up around an alcoholic. You never know what their mood's going to be. So always trying to play the guessing game of the who do I need to be right now to keep the peace? And it was a huge part of my adult life. And I had been working for years on this pattern, and it wasn't really until I started microdosing a few months in, maybe 4 or 5 months in, that all of a sudden it clicked and I was able to turn a lot of that off. Now, it wasn't overnight, it wasn't perfect, but the intense physical reaction that I was getting around, once again, just the possibility of conflict, that really started to subside. And I was able to really start to work through a variety of patterns. That was probably one of my biggest ones, but that was really big. And so we all have these patterns. They're not good, they're not bad. They are what they are. We learn them. Even if you had an amazing childhood, there are patterns that we can pick up through adulthood, early or through childhood, through early adulthood, regular adulthood, that may not be the most supportive of our life. And just to bring the awareness to that, to be able to make some intentional change around that is really powerful. It can be very healing, it can be very freeing as well, and can be very supportive of your mental and emotional health, which is, once again, a big part of why microdosing can be very supportive of mental and emotional health. Also, in the fact that what this is physically doing in your body is it attaches to one of your serotonin receptors. And serotonin increases a little bit. And for a lot of us who have anxiety and depression, a lot of us are also not producing enough serotonin. And that serotonin is not always getting to where it needs to go. I remember taking an organic acids test many years ago, and I basically no neurotransmitters were being produced and or transmitted anywhere. And then I also had low cholesterol, which inhibited cholesterol is really important in the transportation of neurotransmitters to where they need to go. And I had a really hard time increasing my cholesterol to a normal level, which we don't think about that. We think high cholesterol is bad. The lower the cholesterol, the better. Well, no, not necessarily. Too low can also be bad. So yeah, I mean, I've really struggled. And, is it genetic? Is it trauma based? Is it, because of all my other issues that were going on? Yes, probably all of it. And so just having that increase in serotonin, that is really supportive of your mental emotional health as well.
Yeah. And on that note, there are physical changes that you can see from using psilocybin as well. So, like Megan just said, when we have these other things going on in our body that affect like our serotonin levels and so many other things in our body, it's important that we address them. I mean, yes, supplements can be super helpful here, especially on the off days after like doing a journey and coming off of it, which we'll talk about that at some point. But one of the things that I actually experienced after my mini shift journey, which is just like, it's not a full journey. I can't remember what I did. I think it was 0.5 or something. So not a full journey, but it's bigger than microdosing. One of the things that I experienced was actually passing a parasite when I wasn't on any supplements to kill parasites or anything in my body at all. And I also noticed big shifts around gut health in just thinking way more clearly than I had been in the past. So you can also see some pretty crazy like physical effects from using psilocybin yet without any supplements or anything like that.
Exactly. And I will also just say doing trauma healing work in general can make physical changes in the body. When I went through my Reiki training, I also passed a parasite after the first day. And I was months and months off of doing any sort of parasite work. And I passed a significant parasite, we'll say, without being too graphic.
Yeah.
And so this stuff really matters. And the regulation of your nervous system, which this can be supportive in the appropriate people in the appropriate settings with support. And I do want to dive into that along with the mini dosing and some other dosing things that you can do with this can be really, really life changing for your physical health. I will say, cortisol, once again, like I thought my cortisol levels were in a really good spot and that I was pretty darn regulated, and I wasn't. I had come a really long way, and there was still more work to be done, and microdosing and just overall journey work in the psychedelic world has been life changing. Really, really life changing for me when it's come to that. And I have been very lucky is not quite, it doesn't feel like the right word, but being able to be in this space and having the experiences that I've had and these tools haven't really gone into a cortisol flare in quite some time, even in periods of really high stress. And I've been really able to stay on the more regulated side. And even if I get dysregulated for a few days or even a week, I can always come right back into a regulated state, which I would not have been able to do previously. It would have really set me into a flare. And then, for me, with my history of autoimmunity, think cortisol flare. All right, am I going to have a gut flare? Am I going to have an autoimmune flare? Like it's a cascade of events that I'm just aware of. And there are some nerves that come along with that for sure. So microdosing is really a small dose. You should have no psychedelic effects of this. I also want to acknowledge and really stress that just microdosing by itself will not fix you. It, just like many other things, microdosing is a tool to help you along in your journey, along with many other tools that are also available. And I think that is really important. I've heard so many stories of, oh, I tried microdosing. Oh, I got sick. Oh, I didn't feel anything. I didn't do anything. I didn't feel very good. Like all of these things. And if you're just doing this on your own without any education, without any support of someone who understands what could be going on in your body, physically, mentally, and or emotionally, I don't see as many benefits. For some people, if you have done a lot of work, if you are coming in with a lot of tools already, maybe you can do this on your own. I came in with a lot of tools. I joined 3 microdosing groups, and I was in microdosing groups for the better part of a year before I felt good going out on my own and doing it by myself. Now, there was also curiosity and exploration and wanting to microdose with other things other than mushrooms, which was one of those. And I was also always working with someone. And I continue to always be working with someone in this space to help me along in my journey. And I know that's not possible for everyone, but if it is a possibility for you, I cannot encourage you enough to find someone that you feel safe with, that has experience and knowledge in this space, to be able to support you, especially at the beginning while you're first getting started, so that you can understand and process and learn and really use this tool to all of its advantages. And there are a ton. I always tell people microdosing is not a magic pill. There's no magic fix here. And if I had to find one, it's the closest thing I've ever found.
100%. I've said that to one of my clients before too.
Yeah, so it is really valuable, and there are precautions. If you are on literally any medication, if you have any health issues, please, please, please talk to someone before starting microdosing as well. It can be used as a tool to wean off of certain medications under physician supervision. Please don't do this by yourself. This is also not medical advice, just blanket statement here. So it can be a tool, and just because you're on a certain medication doesn't disqualify you. And there may be some extra precautions that need to be taken in order to be able to microdose. So please chat with someone. I am open and available as a resource. Once again, I do have formal education. I've spent most of last year in a variety of courses learning all of this, learning different protocols, contraindications, how to support people who are on different medications, and a variety of ways to do that. I've successfully helped people wean off of certain anti-anxiety and antidepressants under the care of their doctor as well. And so it's very possible. And please don't do this by yourself. It can go really bad.
Yeah, I cannot imagine having started this by myself, just because so many emotions and things are coming up. You become so much more aware of your body, and you need to have, whether that's like, I mean, preferably guidance, like you were just saying, is going to be the best thing. But you also have to use other tools like journaling, somatic stuff, whether you're having a session with someone else to like help you integrate with energy work, emotion and body code. These, if you're truly trying to accomplish like healing with psilocybin, I would say adding those things in are a must. Like you have to have that. Because if not, you're just going to kind of stay in the same spot and potentially not push forward as much as you would like. And for example, too, now that I'm thinking about this, when I first started, I was coming off of healing from mold. And I remember one of the things you told me is you might want to have a mast cell stabilizer on hand because you could potentially get like some sort of flare up. Sure enough, the first time I did it, I kid you not, my whole torso just broke out in like a very weird rash that I had never seen before. And that was a freaky thing. I think I ended up taking the mast cell stabilizer, but part of me feels like I was also just pushing something out because it was a one-time thing and it never came back. But just like random things like that, where if you don't have the education on that, that could be very scary for someone. So it's really important to be communicating, working with someone, and having other tools to help yourself integrate.
Exactly. And this is a big thing, especially with the population that we work with. And when I hosted a retreat earlier this year, and there was multiple people who coming in with digestive issues, chronic illness issues, mast cell issues, and the ability for me to be aware of that, to have knowledge of that from a dosage standpoint, there are certain ways that we can prepare, especially larger doses, is really valuable. And no one had any issues with all the precautions that we took. Like, it was amazing and beautiful, and everyone got a lot out of their experience. And I've heard horror stories as well. And so and definitely with larger journey work, and I don't think we'll have time to get into all of the precautions with that, because there are a ton that I recommend going into larger journey work. But even with microdosing and we'll say mini dosing, which we'll dive deeper into here, there are some precautions. And there are also, some people just do capsules, and the capsules can include the specific microdose. A lot of times capsules are 0.1, which I do not like. They also can include a variety of other things that we don't know quite the quantities of. And not the biggest fan of that. The way I typically take my microdose and recommend to anyone that I support is the mushrooms are ground up, and so it's easier to digest. So if you have digestive issues, if you have mast cell issues, the likelihood of you reacting goes down. And you can measure how much you want. And you're not required to start at a zero point 0.1. Point 0.1 it really is aggressive for a lot of people, especially depending on the strain of mushroom that you have. And some of them aren't bad. I mean, I've taken 0.1 and barely noticed anything. I've also taken 0.1 and been in a place that was not quite all physically here for the whole time. So that's why I really like having just like ground up, and that way I can choose and measure out how much I or anyone that I'm supporting can use. And then I have a recommendation for how much lion's mane, and then I also like to pair it with cacao. For some people, we will use some other adaptogenic mushrooms. I microdosed this morning and I used turkey tail just for some extra immune support. I felt that was really important for me right now, and that was great. I've used cordyceps. I've done reishi. Reishi is a pretty common one too to use with microdosing. Reishi brings me down a little too much, so I don't usually do that with my microdosing. If I do a mini dose in the afternoon, I might use it. So just be very aware of all of that. And if you do have chronic health issues, also be very careful about your sourcing. I mean, that goes with everyone, but particularly if you have chronic health issues, be very careful with your sourcing, because some people use some products that can be very inflammatory for people with chronic health issues. So just be very mindful of that. I think that feels complete. So let's talk about mini dosing. So why don't you share a little bit more about your experience mini dosing, and then I've done a variety of these myself too.
Yeah, so mini dosing, I have only done two sessions with that. And the
Real quick,
reason,
just before you dive in,
yeah,
you were doing this with someone under supervision,
yes,
with a facilitator who is trained, who I know and trust. Like
yes.
a very, very supportive person.
Yeah, I would not have done this point blank if I didn't feel comfortable with this person. And I also spent time, like I met her beforehand. She spent time like 45 minutes talking with me, telling me how it was going to go. When you're first into this, it's just like when I started. It's a scary thing because you don't have like a lot of control. You don't know how the situation's going to go. So it's really important that you feel comfortable with the person and whatnot. So yes, she was monitoring me the whole time. It was a very relaxed, good experience. Before I decided to do the mini shift, in the end of January is when I did it. The month of January was really awful for me. I got stuck in some sort of depression that felt old, is the best way for me to put it. Like how I felt when I was in high school. I have no idea what was happening. It was more like I said this earlier, it felt like the death of me, like something was dying off. Like Megan had mentioned when she started microdosing, it brought up the anxiety, didn't realize how bad it was. I think this was one of those situations for me where it was like, whoa, the depression's still there a little bit and it's got to be like purged out and worked through. So I was really low in January, did the mini shift at the end of January, and the best way for me to describe it, when I went into it, my intentions were to have balanced energy, to come out of what I was feeling and just like step into the new. I knew I was ready or on the cusp of stepping into the new. So that was really my intentions around it. During the session, I had almost like flashbacks, and I don't know if you've ever experienced that with, I'm sure you have, like almost like flashbacks of different like things that were traumatic to me or that I perceived as traumatic in my life. And then I saw like, not to dive too far into it because I don't want to sound like, if you're not familiar with this, it might sound a little bit crazy, but like seeds were being planted. There was all kinds of things that were happening. And that is when I passed the parasite. After that, I was kind of focusing on wrapping up some gut health stuff as well. And that was one of the things that like vivid things came to me. Like you need to do a coffee enema. There's still a couple bugs in your stomach, like very clear things. after the session, I waited too long to ask for help, which was actually a big thing that I have been working on with microdosing, is just asking for help, speaking my needs. Yeah, and it showed me. It was like a week. Yeah, I think it was a week and a half after I felt better, but I also like didn't feel that great. I was using all the tools that I knew how to do myself, the somatic work, the journaling, even doing some energy work on myself, and it wasn't budging to what I needed to feel or what needed to happen. So finally, after a day of feeling completely frozen, it was really awful. I reached out for help, in almost instantaneously. It was like, why didn't you do this earlier? Which that was the message for me, like, oh, this is what you need to continue to focus on. So really it was a gateway into what I needed to work on next. And it also helped me wrap up some things that I was hoping to wrap up.
Yeah. And so it's when you do these mini doses, and I'll say mini doses can range anywhere. I mean, a mini dose for someone can be zero point 0.2, to be really honest with you. I'd say more traditionally, it's probably like zero point 0.3 to 1-ish gram, kind of depending on the person. And once again, like the visuals, you probably won't have visuals, but you will likely go in. And what that means is it's very hard to describe, but it's basically you go into like a deeper meditation, and things can come up and things can come through, messages, images, emotions, sensations can come up. I I've done this quite a few times, and usually I do it when I need like a little mini reset for myself. I didn't actually start doing them until after, I think it was at least I had done two, or I had done 3 journeys, is when I started using these. So I was very familiar and very, I had all the tools, and I knew I could pull myself out if I needed to. I knew I could be supported if I needed to, because I had 3 journeys, 3 larger journeys that were facilitated and supported. I have felt very comfortable with myself. And for me, those are usually 0.5 as well. I will also share that when I held my retreat, the first night we did a mini dose. We did a cacao ceremony with a mini dose, and they range between 0.5 to 0.75. And the set and setting were very intentional with this. There was music, the lighting, just there was a lot of clearing that I had done. There was candles, and what we call an altar that had like crystals and cards and flowers and a variety of different things. And it was very, very intentional. And everyone, all of the participants really went in and had a little journey during that, which I've done 0.5 and not. I've done it more as a group, say like a group cohesive experience with people who are also in this space, who once again are very prepared. We've done a lot of journeys together, and we used the cacao with the mini dose as a connection tool for the group. I've done this by myself as, like I said, like a little mini reset. I've also done it as a way to really, if I'm working on a big project and I'm feeling really stuck, sometimes if I'm feeling really called, I will do it then. I've also done it at the beach to just experience nature in a little bit of a deeper way and a connective way. And once again, I was in a very safe, it wasn't crowded. It was a very specific experience that I set up for myself. And once again, I had already done at least 4 journeys. So so lots and lots of experience in what this feels like, and sensations, and all that kind of stuff. So I felt very safe doing this myself. But once again, would absolutely not recommend doing it unless you do have more experience, because there are things that can come up. There are things that can go wrong, especially if your set and setting is not prepared appropriately. And most of the time when I'm doing these, and you obviously experience this as well, very specific music that we use. And it's not just regular music, it's not just meditation music. It is very specifically tailored music to really guide you along. And we use this in larger journey space very, very intentionally. But I would say even in a mini dose setting, it it's way better if you do it intentionally. And it really just helps to guide you. It takes you to the place that you need to do. There are some more meditative ones. There are more upbeat ones. There are ones that like really pull you in. A lot of like string type music. The drums are typically more for like more activating type music and to bring up a little bit more energy inside of you. And so it's really important to understand all of that. And once again, do not recommend doing any of this type of work unless you're working with someone. Once again, I would not do a larger journey without someone that I trusted there. I would not do it. Even on mushrooms, which I've done quite a few times at this point, it would not even cross my mind to not have someone there who I knew could support me if I needed it throughout that journey.
Yeah. And I think once you get into this and actually see how you feel while using it, it's going to give you a better idea, because it's not like you're doing mushrooms with your friends. Like, I'm trying to find a different way to describe it. It's not it almost it's just that intentional factor behind it, and then having the guidance to help you go through it. Like, I would also not feel comfortable. I mean, I haven't even done a full journey yet, so of course not. I would never even think about doing that by myself. But even with the mini doses, I think I had done it one time when I was feeling really, really stuck, and I had talked to you like the day of, and you literally guided me through the entire thing. And like, I knew that if I needed something, I could reach out to you. So it's just like, it's not a like a willy-nilly like fun thing. I don't want people to think that, because it is something that needs to be taken like pretty seriously.
Exactly. And really I continue to use any sort of plant medicine, any sort of psychedelic as a very significant tool. And I'll tell you, so I've done MDMA, larger journeys on MDMA. Once again, I would not, especially there's a lot of health considerations to take into account with MDMA. MDMA is also a beautiful, beautiful, beautiful and therapeutic medicine that is so healing for so many people. It continues to be just hold a very special place in my heart. It's a heart opener. I do like the mushrooms. Mushroom journeys for me tend to be, I do what your heart feels like is right to do. I also don't do ayahuasca as your first one. If I could give you from my personal experience, don't do ayahuasca as your first medicine. Also, I mean, feel really called to do it. It feel very, very called to do it, and also and this goes across the board. Once again, I just want to reiterate, be very careful who you work with in this space. I have heard horror stories, and I am so fortunate that I have found very safe people, educators, mentors, facilitators that provide such an amazing and safe environment. I'm so fortunate because, once again, I've heard really bad horror stories. And, for me, during ayahuasca, thank goodness I was in the space that I was in and with people who had been doing this literally their entire lives, because I needed that personally. And not everyone that I journeyed with did. Me personally, though, I needed it. It was, once again, I'll talk about it more in another episode here, but it was really intense. And once again, and really for all of my journeys, like, thank goodness I've always been around such safe people, because I have needed a lot of help and support in a lot of my experiences. And we'll do another episode on larger journeys, and I'll share a little bit more about my larger journeys and different things that have happened. I've had amazing and beautiful ones. I've also had incredibly challenging ones, and really everything in between, very physical ones, very non-physical ones. And so I'm certainly happy to share more of that. So is there anything else, Shannon, that you would like to share before we wrap up?
No, I think one little thing that I want to add is that if you are contemplating getting into this, trying it, I would say maybe look into like what shadow work is, what inner child work is, before you start, because it will come up during this, and it would be better to have an idea of what you're dealing with before you jump into it. And that's the last thing that I'll add.
Great advice. There's lots of tools and resources for that. Once again, you can always feel free to reach out to us. And we'd be happy to give you some guidance here, to chat with you more, to see if you are a candidate. Yes, I do offer spaces to do this. They are changing literally as we speak. And into this week, they're changing, but there are always options, and there will always be options, at least for the foreseeable future, if someone is interested in this and a candidate. And a conversation beforehand is absolutely required. There are ways to work with that are very financially reasonable, in my opinion, especially compared to what I've seen on the market out there. So know that there are options out there for you. Please never hesitate to reach out to us. You can always send us a comment, DM. You can always book a free consult with us. All of that's in show notes, link in bio, all that kind of stuff across social media. So little different episode. Thank you so much for joining us. Please, once again, we are new. If you can like, subscribe, if it resonates, leave us a 5-star review. It really, really does mean a lot to us. We've been loving this, and we really want to continue with this. And if you have topic ideas, we also love to hear that. And thank you so much for joining us. We hope you have a great rest of your day.